Hi, welcome again. I am so very, very happy and proud to introduce Andrew Freedman. Andrew Freedman is a Colorado native. He has an undergraduate degree from Tufts and a law degree from Harvard. After law school, Mr. Freedman joined the campaign of his current boss, Governor John Hickenlooper, and after helping him secure victory, he was appointed Chief of Staff to Lieutenant Governor Joe Garcia. In 2013, Governor Hickenlooper appointed Mr. Freedman as the state's first Director of Marijuana Coordination, otherwise known as the Marijuana Czar. As Director, Mr. Freedman's mission is to ensure the efficient and effective regulation of medical and adult use cannabis while promoting public health and safety. Welcome, Mr. Freedman.
Pleasure to be here.
Okay, so tell us, please, have you successfully regulated the cannabis industry in Colorado?
So my short answer will be it's for the rollout, and for the time being, yes, we have. So I would say there are two parts to that question, though. The first is, is the sky fallen since we've tried to have legitimate marijuana growers and sellers? And the answer is no, the sky's not fallen. It turns out you can have a very regulated industry, that they can, in fact, not only accept regulation, but actually ask for regulation. And then that industry can be legitimate, that you can track the prices and that the prices can go down over time as competition increases. The second question will be, how does this figure into public health, public safety, youth use over the long term? Over the short term, I think we haven't seen the sky fall. All those metrics have stayed basically normal, flatlined. But it'll take 5 or 10 years to know what the impact of a legitimate marijuana industry will have on public safety and public health.
Okay, I interviewed Dr. Casseret, who wrote a book called Stoned, A Doctor's Path to Medical Marijuana, and I asked him a question, and I gave him a bunch of other substances, which are perfectly legal, so it included alcohol, tobacco, saturated fat, sugar, and marijuana. Marijuana was on the bottom of the list as dangerous, and of course tobacco was first. I don't think we're going to follow the marijuana, the alcohol model when it comes to marijuana. Is there a protocol that we are developing in Colorado that will be useful to everybody?
So when we're looking at regulations, we take from the best of everyone. So, for edibles, for example, for packaging, labeling, for stamping edibles, which is something we're dealing with right now, we take that from prescription drugs and from what have we learned that has best minimized accidental ingestion. For licensing, and we do find it to be somewhat similar to alcohol. How did we license people in alcohol? What process did it go through? We also take from gaming and making sure that we're keeping criminals out of the system rather than controlling the system. And then we even take from tobacco with our public education campaigns. What has worked over the long term? What hasn't worked? I think what we're looking for is to just not repeat the mistakes that previous regulated industries have had and try to improve as much as possible.
That's great. Recently, the Attorney General of Colorado, Cynthia Kaufman, I believe it is, was involved in a summit of attorneys general regarding standardizing protocols for legal cannabis. I believe there were 40 attorneys general there. Have you coordinated with her on some of the things that went on at that summit, and have you incorporated any of that into Colorado specifically?
I don't think I'm aware of that summit. So the Attorney General is separately elected. We do work with them, and particularly on legal advice, but the policy positions that she might take are independent of the governor's office. So I actually am not aware of the summit that she was at.
Okay, I'm sorry. You were talking about the edibles. So I think that the Maureen Dowd in the New York Times recently wrote an article about overeating the cannabis. Is there a way to monitor the dosages? I know that that's very, especially when it comes to medical cannabis. What is there a science that you could monitor how much is a good dosage or a dangerous dosage and levels like that? Is that something that you've come across?
So it's something we're starting to come across. So I would say the dosing problem for edibles is one of three problems that we see in edibles. One of the solutions that we have to work towards. You know, and for those who don't know, I would say the problem are twofold. One is you can get a lot of marijuana through edibles, and the second is that it can take anywhere from 1 to 2 hours for that marijuana to hit, and so people tend to, especially new time users, think that they got a weak dose and take some more, and then only then feel the first dose and then the second dose, and then suddenly they're in a pretty bad journey. What we've learned is that basically 10 milligrams, 5 to 10 milligrams seems to be the place where people do not have bad experiences, unpleasant experiences. And so what we're trying to do is make sure that for new, naive users, first of all, we're giving them public education campaigns, but we're also making it really intuitive what a single dose is. And then being very, very clear through public education campaigns, but also bud tenders, people who are selling me stuff, are saying you have to wait 2 hours after taking this to know what the effect has been on you. And so before you could have more than one dose in a product. Now, for the most part, what you're having, a new user will see will be one dose per product.
That's great. The 60 Minutes report that they ran on legalized cannabis in Colorado talked about the biggest problem that the cannabis business was facing was banking. And Governor Hickenlooper had asked the federal government if he could charter a special cannabis credit union. Is there any progress in that?
Yes, unfortunately not the kind of progress we like to see. The Federal Reserve did deny the credit unions access to a master account, effectively saying you cannot be a credit union. The credit union has sued them, and that's going to court, but that was not the result we were hoping for there. Okay. We really believed that that specific solution found a way of concentrating the risk amongst people who could then profit enough in order to have a sustainable model, and could then make sure that all these places were staying legitimate. We thought it was a clever and good solution to it, and we were sad that it didn't make progress.
Right. There's a theory being kicked around that around tax season, a lot of news outlets were running a story that because of federal prohibition against cannabis, people in the cannabis industry could not deduct on their federal tax returns certain business expenses, and effectively they were paying a tax rate of 60 or 70%. And this has, and nonetheless, the business is still booming, and this has disincentivized the federal level at looking at easing these type of restrictions on the local businesses. Do you give that any credence?
No, I don't buy that. So I think, first of all, people talk a lot about taxes for marijuana. Well, of course, the state's doing this now because they're getting so much money from marijuana. There are a lot of good reasons to talk about wanting to legalize marijuana. You think it's in a more enlightened criminal justice system. You think it's a better way of dealing with addiction. You don't like the black markets. You think it's safer. You have a libertarian view, and we shouldn't be making something illegal. There's a lot of really great arguments. Taxes are not one of them, in my opinion. So this year, the first year of legalization, we'll have made about $78 million statewide for out of taxes for both medical and recreational marijuana. That's out of a $26 billion budget. And it's going to go up over time. We might get to 100, even 120. But that's still a drop in the bucket in terms of tax revenue coming in. Now, for the federal government, it's going to be so much even less of a drop in the bucket. It isn't. That's the tail wagging the dog. It's not trivial money, and it's something we want to go to good things, but it's not a reason to center policy around it.
Understood. There were stories about a lawsuit filed against the state of Colorado by Oklahoma and Nebraska because they felt that your laws liberalizing the use of marijuana or cannabis affected their states. Has that moved in any way?
It's still in court proceedings. I haven't checked up on it lately. I think the Supreme Court asked for the Solicitor General to weigh in and file a brief for the United States. I don't believe that brief has come through. Our view on it is always the same. First of all, we're working our hardest to stop out-of-state diversion. We're doing that by trying to be able to track and license and really try to shut down the unlicensed market as much as we can. And then on the other side of it, we have hired an intelligence analyst that is spending full time marking in order to figure out what is going out of state and where is it coming from. But the only people who have the power to shut us down would be the federal government if they decided to shut us down in this experiment. And so I think this is an attempt for somebody else to invoke the supremacy clause for the United States, and the only people who have the right to do that, in our opinion, is the United States.
Right, the federal government. A previous speaker mentioned that the price of cannabis has gone down about 50% in Colorado over the last year. Does the market seem to be self-regulating, finding its groove? Does it have to do with the broader legalization?
Cannabis is coming down in price. I think 50% might be high. I would have said more around 30% at this point. But the truth is, yes, that it's very simple economics. When it first came out, demand was high and supply was low. We have not seen, to our knowledge so far, through both public health surveys and through polling, we've not seen an increase in demand to a significant extent. So supply has increased and demand hasn't necessarily increased, and has definitely not increased in the same place. And so you'll see costs go down. I think you'll continue to see costs go down.
You're not seeing cannabis tourism increasing in Colorado?
We probably saw a bump of people who were interested as they came in as tourists for it. The extent to which people came to Colorado directly for, not to ski and use marijuana, but just to come and use marijuana. It's really hard to get that statistic, so we just don't know. That's something over the course of the next couple of years, as other states open up, we'll see if people will continue to come to Colorado. We had a great year of tourism, but we had good years of tourism before that as well.
Okay. And do you have is there like a hotline, a red phone between state office and the federal law enforcement?
I think there's no red phone, but if any and every time there is a call from the federal government to the state government, no matter who it goes to, it comes to me, so that we're all talking about what's going on. The Department of Agriculture talks to the EPA. The Department of Revenue talks to federal law enforcement agencies. And so unless it's strictly confidential about an ongoing case, that will come towards me, and we'll make sure that the governor is aware of that communication.
So for the typical consumer, layman, and I include myself in that, you've just mentioned a few departments in the government bureaucracy that make your job sound extremely complicated to coordinate between, and all states have similar departments on state levels. So I'm imagining that you've got to coordinate that internally in the states, and then you have to coordinate that externally with the federal government.
And with local governments. Yeah, there's a reason my job exists. Right. So I would say there are 10 departments that have significant amount of work to do because of legalization of marijuana. And so we work between those departments. We gather them together once every 2 weeks. We use that as a conduit to going up to the federal government and down to local level.
Okay, that's terrific. I want to just go into a different direction for a moment, if you don't mind. There's a lot of talk now. You mentioned it earlier in good reasons for legalization, but there's a lot of talk now that legalizing cannabis is becoming a human rights issue, particularly because of places like New York, where men of color and white men, statistically speaking, are likely to carry the same amounts of cannabis in their pocket, yet the men of color, meaning African American or Latinos, are arrested at 10 times the rate. Is it a human rights issue? Is it something that really should be considered?
It belongs in the talk about the war on drugs, which I believe the war on drugs has a human rights element to it. And so in that way, yes, that it should be part of the discussion, that over the course of time, marijuana has been used in a multitude of racist ways to arrest, harass, otherwise harm minorities, culture, socioeconomic. That being said, do I think legalizing will be a huge U-turn in any of that? No. These are really serious, really complex social issues that require a much broader dialogue. So I don't think you solve the relationships between the policing community and the black community by legalizing marijuana. I think whatever distrust there might be, whatever racial profiling might exist, are going to continue to exist after legalization. I do think that it is one symptom, that marijuana has been used as one symptom of harassing people, though. So it belongs in the conversation. It's not going to win the day.
Well, I think we could start by not calling it marijuana anymore. The name marijuana was given. It was a racist name sometime at the turn of the 20th century.
Yep.
That's what they say historically.
On the other hand, marijuana was. I agree that so if anybody doesn't know, that it was cannabis for a long time, and then marijuana with a hard J, letting people know that it's coming from Mexico. But in our Constitution, and a lot of people who are very pro marijuana in Colorado, it's written as the word marijuana. So it's interesting because it has been adopted by a lot of people.
I understand. Israel recently announced that medical cannabis will be available in pharmacies. Can you conceive of something like that happening? Maybe if the science is a little more specific. Can you see that happening in Colorado?
Yeah, I would love for it to happen in Colorado. I think it's going to take the federal government to help us get there. I would love for there to be. I think the worst thing we've done on this is make it a Schedule I narcotic, and then stopped basic scientific medical research from happening on marijuana. Because I think in a perfect world, we wouldn't have all these state systems of medical marijuana and recreational marijuana. What we could have is recreational marijuana, and then if it's for medical purposes, you've gone to your doctor, it's gone through its FDA testing, and you can get it on your insurance. I think that would be a very reasonable way of handling it.
Yeah, you just made a lot of people watching this very, very happy when you said that. Okay, so we're running out of time. We only have a couple of minutes left. Can you tell us, since you brought it up, is there an eventuality that cannabis will be declassified as a Schedule I narcotic by the federal government? Is there that possibility in the horizon anytime soon?
So I will say the eventuality is that it's going to come to other states. That to me seems very clear from polling and from the movements that are going on. The federal government, I have a complicated job, but it pales in comparison to how complicated it is at the federal government level. I just don't understand. I would think that we would be able to deschedule it today, but that's obviously not happening. And so I don't know what it'll take for the federal government to say. I think on the easiest level that everyone should be able to accept is, one, it should be descheduled so that we can do the proper research, because people are doing this by themselves, and they're using it now it's anecdotal rather than it could be rigorously tested. And the second one is, for states that have decided to make it legal, it should be safe. So there should be a banking solution. There should be help from the EPA to deal with pesticides. They should have as much help from the federal government as possible to make sure that it's safe and regulated. Those seem like easy wins to me that don't require the federal government to legalize, but it hasn't happened so far, so I don't know.
Well, correct me if I'm wrong, but having it classified as a Schedule I narcotic, one of the translations of that means it has no medical use. Yep. But international studies have proven, and the University of Mississippi as well, have proven that it does have medical use if used properly. So,
yep.
Is it an executive decision, or is it a legislative solution?
I don't understand the politics that are going on at that level. I think the executive branch can, on their own, do it, but I don't understand enough about why there's been inaction here.
All right. Well, I really appreciate your joining us today. You've been most enlightening. I'm sorry to have taken time from your very busy day. And let's keep in touch. And
yep.
I appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Best of luck to you.
Thank you.